The ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered the closing address at the party's two-day NEC meeting. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
We need to show determination in addressing the toxic legacy of state capture that resulted in security institutions being weakened, misdirected and hollowed out. Divisions and factions in the ANC are themselves becoming a threat to our democracy. Economic challenges of income and wealth inequality and the triple challenges threaten state security, and these require urgent interventions from all of us social partners. Regression of ethical and moral leadership has resulted in what I would call an existential crisis. Our credibility and legitimacy are being undermined, yes, by our inability to act. As the ANC, we should analyze and assess threats caused by others and threats caused by our own acts of omission and commission. This requires a multifaceted and coordinated approach by the cluster and the government institutions where self-reflection is practiced. The ANC needs to commit towards deepening and defending the national democratic revolution. Counter-revolution is wearing a different face in our country. There are expressions of democracy under threat, which are a result of loss of ethical compass and moral direction. The ANC and the Alliance reaffirm our support for the Constitution. Must state it clear that we reaffirm our support for the sacred document that enshrines the Bill of Rights, and we reaffirm our support for the judiciary and distance ourselves from narratives that seek to negate this. The ANC and government have demonstrated our principled support for the objectives and work of the Zondo Commission of Inquiry since its inception. The National Executive Committee has agreed to establish an NEC task team to guide the ANC's response to the Zondo Commission report. This would leads to a development of a discussion paper for the ANC structures on corruption and state capture and processing of recommendations relating to ANC and its deployees. Whilst government will only pronounce fully on receipt of the complete report, the ANC urges government to fully address behavior and causes that allowed state capture to occur.
Well, that was just a short while ago, the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa in the closing address of the ANC NEC Lekgotla. Let's speak now to Angelo Fick, as the Director of Research at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute here in Johannesburg. Mr. Fick, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks indeed for your time. Part of that clip there, the ANC President saying that they've reaffirmed their support for the judiciary and the Constitution and distanced themselves from narratives that negate this. Not saying very much about the spat between the presidency and the Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, but certainly taking a swipe.
Well, this would have been the summary of the consensus of the NEC meeting, and as such it wouldn't have named individuals, but it certainly directed very much at Ms. Sisulu as member of the NEC and other aspects of the ANC and components of the ANC that wish to drive in that direction. It is a very pointed remark from the NEC as a whole through the president's summation and his speech. And therefore, presumably, it is an attempt by the NEC to begin to put the orders or the House of the ANC in order ahead of its election campaign internally, but also in the wake of last year's local municipal election results and ahead of the 2024 election coming up. And so when Cyril Ramaphosa talks about this as an existential crisis, one imagines that the distance traveled between January 8 and today has been a rather rocky road, and they need to get the train, so to speak, vaguely back on track if they're to survive over the next 2 years.
Is his tone enough, though? I guess it would depend on which side of the fence you're sitting. Those who support the sentiments that were shared by Minister Lindiwe Sisulu, and those who say somewhat she may have been disrespectful to her boss. Was it enough what he said in that statement on the outcomes of that Lekgotla, or is the general perception that he should have done more? Because remember, we're sitting at a time while this debacle is taking place, while the ANC presidential race is certainly hitting up. We're seeing those first salvos being fired. We should take it, I guess, within the context of that as well. Does President Ramaphosa, or the ANC president, appear any weaker?
Well, I think we need to separate what happens to Lindiwe Sisulu as a member of cabinet and what happens to the sentiments that she seems to want to profess inside the ANC. And so today, Cyril Ramaphosa, speaking as the president of the ANC, can only remark on what happens inside the ANC. If he spends the next few days coming up with a statement from the presidency beyond what we've heard already, it may come out of what was the instruction to the deployee that he is of the ANC via the NEC to change his cabinet. But that remains to be seen in the week ahead. I think he doesn't appear weaker as president of the ANC. He still has to build a consensus, and this is going to be very difficult. We know that he is a contentious figure inside a movement that has been split almost down the middle since 2017. And the idea that you would pull all of this together ahead of a leadership race is very optimistic. My sense is that these are, if we understand the ANC to work via consensus and democratic centralism, the idea is that the president gets to sum up what the NEC's thoughts were, and in doing so, in diplomatic language, indicate that there will be consequences. The consequences we await to hear from inside the ANC, whether or not they start disciplining members inside the party for bringing the party into disrepute, by the imputation that the constitution engendered by the party and enacted by its various administrations, can be undermined. And secondly, we wait to hear from the presidency of the Republic of South Africa whether somebody who took an oath of office to uphold the constitution can, impugn that constitution and its value and continue to serve as a member of cabinet.
Is this very much like a precursor to what we will see? As I indicated, the ANC election here is upon us, and I did say the first salvos certainly look like they've been fired.
It could be, but again, if the organization is to survive beyond this leadership contestation, the leadership contestation cannot begin to question the gains that the organization wishes to claim. If the organization has lost some of its electoral support, it must, in some senses, claim that there are gains that have to be acknowledged. And the Constitution would have been a major gain for the post-apartheid ANC. The fact that a senior member of the ANC suggests that the very Constitution enacted by administration upon administration that she served in has somehow betrayed the people of South Africa, and the Judiciary, which is appointed by administration after administration that she served in, and that there are various other places where she could have raised these challenges, including cabinet, through Parliament, through the Judicial Services Commission, but chose to raise it in public, may speak to a tension that I think anybody who's interested in challenging Cyril Ramaphosa's leadership will have to face, which is the tension between one, upholding the achievements of the ANC as claimed by the organization, two, challenging the leadership as it is perceived at the moment as not having fulfilled the promise of the post-1994 settlement. And while there is much that is truth in the original allegations, analysis and remarks made by Lindiwe Sisulu in that first piece, the question remains whether she is in fact the person to do so as a member of cabinet, and whether, as somebody who's sworn to uphold the Constitution, as I said earlier, should be challenging that in such a public manner.
Yeah.
This is not a matter of freedom of speech at all. I think that is a misdirection.
Yeah. Also, remarking there, he's saying that the gains of democracy have to be defended and that his movement is going through a period of a decay. Part of what was discussed in that ANC NEC Lekgotla, bolstering efforts for the poor. Do you think the ANC at this particular point, given of course the backdrop of how it performed in the last election, in the local government election, understands the task at hand at this particular point and what it needs to convince the general population of, judging of course by the sentiments shared by the ANC president in those closing remarks?
So I think firstly, the battle is inside the ANC, convincing members of the party what the mission of the party is and should be. And that's going to be a very difficult task, given that there isn't really agreement on what that is. There is a general consensus around, being pro-poor, but many of the actions of members of the African National Congress haven't necessarily been pro-poor. Let's just think of the scandals around, taking away money meant for, among other things, communication during the COVID crisis, money that was meant for PPE, corruption around the procurement during a crisis that threatened everybody's health. And there's a kind of misunderstanding there by those people embroiled in those allegations about how that is supposed to benefit the majority poor. The kind of inequality that the president referred to is not an inequality that he is himself not party to. This is a man who's a billionaire who does not live like most South Africans. I mean, I don't live like most South Africans, and I'm positively poor compared to Cyril Ramaphosa, a private citizen. And so the idea of the rich few and the poor many is one that the ANC has, to some extent, engendered and needs to account for. How you go about changing that is a major challenge for a party so internally driven. And when it comes to implementing policy, it's not just that the ANC has failed to implement its own policy, but some of its policies have engendered the inequality that we've seen so far. And if there is to be self-reflection, if there is to be some kind of change, the party, the movement would have to go beyond merely attacking its critics as enemies of the people or enemies of the party and begin to maybe listen with the 21st century ear and not repeat these 20th century slogans in response to the crisis.
Angelo Fick, always a pleasure speaking to you on the programme. Thank you very much. Director at the Auwal Socio-Economic Research Institute here in Johannesburg. Of course, giving some remarks, of course, just moments ago, the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa wrapping up that ANC NEC Lekgotla.